The sun was sinking behind the desert horizon when a group of masked gunmen stepped onto the highway, their rifles raised, blocking the road. They thought they had their next easy target, a lone trucker carrying valuable cargo. But they had no idea who they had just stopped, and they were about to regret it. If you love stories about real men who refuse to back down, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe for more gripping trucker tales of courage, grit, and justice on the open road. The sun hung low over the desert highway, casting an orange glow over the endless stretch of cracked asphalt. Dust swirled in the dry air as a convoy of trucks rumbled forward, their chrome grills reflecting the fading light. It was the kind of road where trouble had a way of finding you, and veteran trucker Hank Lawson had seen his fair share over the years. Hank was a relic of another era, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, and built like a man who had spent a lifetime hauling freight across America. His rig, an old but reliable Kenworth, was his home, his livelihood, and his pride. The miles had worn on both of them, but neither had given up the fight. Tonight was supposed to be a routine run, nothing special, just another trip hauling cargo across state lines. But as Hank peered into his side mirror, a knot of unease tightened in his gut. A convoy of black SUVs had been tailing them for the last 20 miles, keeping just enough distance to avoid suspicion, but close enough that they weren't just passing through. Hank had been on the road long enough to know what that meant. He reached for his CB radio, his voice steady but firm. "Anyone else got eyes on those SUVs? Looks like trouble's brewing." A couple of responses crackled through. Other truckers in the convoy had noticed too. These weren't highway patrol or some lost travelers. They were hunting something, or someone. Ahead, the road narrowed into a desolate canyon pass, where the horizon seemed to close in on itself. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. Hank flexed his fingers on the wheel. He'd driven through cartel country before, places where men disappeared without a trace. He knew the routine. Truckers got stopped, their cargo got seized, and if they were lucky, they were left breathing. The CB came alive again, this time with a voice thick with concern. "5 SUVs, full blackout. We're boxed in, Hank." And just like that, the trap was sprung. The SUVs accelerated, closing the distance in seconds. The lead vehicle swerved into the middle of the road, slamming on its brakes, forcing the first truck in the convoy to screech to a halt. The others followed, bringing the entire line of trucks to an abrupt standstill. Hank exhaled slowly. Doors swung open. Armed men spilled out of the SUVs, dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. Assault rifles gleamed under the fading sun. Their movements were quick, methodical. These weren't petty thieves. They were professionals. A stocky man, dressed in tactical gear, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the desert air. "Everyone out of the trucks, now!" Hank didn't move right away. He had dealt with men like this before, guys who thought the world was theirs to take. He wasn't about to be another victim on some forgotten highway. His eyes flicked to the glove box. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He adjusted his worn-out cap, cracked his knuckles, and reached for the door handle. If these gunmen thought this was going to be easy, they had made a serious mistake. Hank pushed the creaking door of his rig open, stepping onto the sun-baked asphalt. His boots hit the ground with a solid thud, his face unreadable beneath the shadow of his cap. Around him, the masked gunmen moved swiftly, barking orders at the other truckers, yanking open doors, and pulling drivers from their cabs. The convoy was under their control, or so they thought. A man who looked like he was in charge strode toward Hank, his rifle slung lazily across his chest. He wasn't in a hurry. He thought he had already won. "Step away from the truck, old man," the gunman ordered, his voice laced with arrogance. "Hands where I can see them." Hank did as he was told, but his eyes never left the man's. He wasn't scared. He had been through worse. "You fellas sure you want to do this?" Hank's voice was slow, deliberate. "Ain't nothing in these trailers worth dying for." The leader smirked and signaled his men to start searching the trucks. Another gunman grabbed Hank by the collar, shoving him backward. Hank barely moved. "We'll decide what's worth taking," the leader sneered. "Your job is to shut up and stay out of the way." Hank looked around. The other truckers were huddled together, hands raised. Most of them were younger, greener. They hadn't been in situations like this before. They were scared. Hank wasn't. One of the masked men climbed into Hank's rig, rummaging through the cabin. "Where's the manifest?" he called out. Hank stayed silent. He could hear them rifling through his personal belongings, his gear. He clenched his fists, but kept his breathing steady. These guys were making a mistake, one they wouldn't walk away from if they pushed him too far. Then came the sound that made Hank's blood boil. A gunman slammed a rifle butt against the hood of his truck. Bang! The metal rang out like a church bell, echoing down the empty highway. Hank's jaw tightened. These men had no respect. His rig was more than just a truck. It was his life. One of the younger gunmen chuckled. "Look at him," he mocked, nudging Hank with his rifle. "Old timer looks mad. What's wrong, Grandpa? You worried about your truck?" Hank met the kid's eyes, his expression deadly calm. "You got no idea what you just stepped into, son." The leader laughed, gesturing for his men to load up whatever they could find. "Enough talk. We'll take what we want, and you'll be on your way." Hank exhaled, rolling his shoulders. These guys thought they were running the show. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The moment their backs were turned, Hank moved. Fast. The time for talking was over. Hank moved like a man half his age. The years on the road had kept him sharp, his reflexes honed from decades of knowing when to talk and when to strike. The moment the gunman turned away, Hank lunged. His fist connected with the nearest thug's throat, a brutal, calculated strike that cut off the man's breath before he could even cry out. The rifle slipped from his grip, and Hank caught it before it hit the ground. The other gunmen spun around, but they were too slow. Hank swung the rifle like a club, smashing another attacker across the jaw. Teeth scattered onto the pavement as the thug crumpled with a gurgled scream. Chaos erupted. "Get him!" the leader roared. Two men rushed Hank, but he was already moving. He used the rifle's stock to slam one in the gut, then drove his knee into the man's face as he doubled over. The other pulled a pistol. Too slow. Hank grabbed his wrist, twisting hard until the bones cracked. The gun dropped, and Hank kicked it under his truck. By now, the other truckers had snapped out of their fear. Seeing an old man take down armed gunmen with his bare hands did something to them. It woke them up. "Let's go!" one of them shouted, and just like that, the convoy fought back. One of the younger drivers tackled a thug to the ground, pummeling him with raw, desperate fury. Another swung a tire iron, shattering a man's kneecap with a sickening crunch. The gunmen were outnumbered, and losing fast. Their leader realized it too late. He backpedaled, yanking his pistol free, his hands shaking as he aimed at Hank. "Don't move!" he screamed. Hank didn't stop. He stared the man down, his voice calm. "You don't want to do that, son." The leader's hands trembled. He had expected easy prey, helpless truckers, not men who fought back. Not a ghost from a past war standing in front of him, fearless, unshaken. Hank took another step. The leader's resolve cracked. He turned and bolted toward his SUV. Bad choice. Hank wasn't about to let him go. He reached into his truck, pulled out something from the glove box, something these thugs never saw coming. And in that moment, everything changed. The gang leader sprinted toward his SUV, kicking up dust in his desperate escape. His men were either groaning on the ground or retreating, scrambling to get back to their vehicles. But Hank wasn't about to let them off that easy. With practiced ease, he pulled out what he had stashed in his glove box, an old, worn Colt M 1911, a relic from another life. The weight was familiar in his grip, a cold, reassuring reminder of the man he used to be. "Stop right there!" Hank barked. The leader skidded to a halt, his hands hovering near his pistol. He hesitated, eyes darting between Hank and the remaining gunman. Hank knew that look. Pure, unfiltered fear. We didn't know, all right? We just needed the cargo," the leader stammered. Hank took a slow step forward, his tone level but firm. "And what exactly did you think was in that trailer?" The leader licked his lips, sweat trickling down his forehead. We heard it was valuable, that it was worth millions." Hank chuckled, shaking his head. "You boys really need better intel." He nodded toward one of the younger truckers, who cautiously stepped forward and swung open the trailer doors. The gang leader's face paled. Inside the truck was no gold, no drugs, no high-value cargo. Just pallets of canned food, medical supplies, and blankets, all labeled for Veterans Outreach Relief. "This convoy?" Hank continued. "It's not some smuggling operation. It's a donation run for struggling veterans, men who fought for this country, men who deserved better." The weight of the revelation hit the gang like a freight train. Some of them exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly realizing the kind of men they had tried to rob. One of the younger gunmen lowered his rifle, swallowing hard. "We didn't know." "You didn't bother to know," Hank corrected. "You just pointed guns at people you thought were easy targets." The leader gritted his teeth. "Look, man, just let us walk. We'll be gone, I swear." Hank didn't move, didn't blink. "You don't get to just walk away after this." Suddenly, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. Flashing red and blue lights crested the hill, multiple police cruisers barreling toward them, sirens blaring. One of the truckers had managed to call for help in the chaos. The gang leader's face twisted in panic. He turned as if to bolt, but Hank's voice stopped him cold. "You run, and I won't hesitate." The leader raised his hands slowly, nodding in reluctant surrender. His men followed suit, dropping their weapons one by one. As the police pulled up, officers spilling out with guns drawn, Hank finally lowered his own weapon. The fight was over. One of the officers, a grizzled sheriff with a silver badge, approached Hank with a knowing smile. "Hell, Hank," he said, shaking his head. "Every time I think you're done raising hell, you go and do something like this." Hank smirked. They picked the wrong trucker. The sheriff let out a chuckle, then turned to his deputies. "Round 'em up, boys. Got ourselves a bunch of dumb bastards who thought they were bigger than the road." As the gang was cuffed and loaded into patrol cars, the younger truckers looked at Hank with newfound respect. One of them, the kid who had hesitated to fight back earlier, stepped forward. "Mr. Hank, you used to be military, didn't you?" Hank glanced down at the old dog tags hanging from his rearview mirror. His past wasn't something he talked about much, but in moments like these, it spoke for itself. "Something like that, kid," he said with a nod. "Something like that." As the dust settled and the convoy prepared to roll out again, Hank climbed back into his rig, gripping the wheel with steady hands. The road was dangerous. The world was changing. But one thing remained the same. Some men weren't meant to be messed with. And today, these punks had learned that lesson the hard way. As the last of the gang members were shoved into the back of the police cruisers, Hank exhaled slowly, his grip loosening on the steering wheel. The adrenaline had kept him steady through the whole ordeal. But now, as the dust settled, the weight of what had happened finally hit him. The convoy had been a target. Again. And for what? A bunch of desperate punks looking for a payday, thinking they could take whatever they wanted. But this wasn't just any convoy. This was a rolling lifeline for veterans who had been forgotten by the world. And Hank wasn't about to let anyone mess with that. The young trucker, the one who had hesitated earlier, lingered by Hank's door. "Sir," he started, shifting awkwardly on his feet. I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know what to do back there." Hank studied the kid for a moment, recognizing the look in his eyes, shame mixed with admiration. He had seen that same look on fresh recruits back in his military days. "You froze," Hank said simply. The kid nodded, lowering his gaze. "Yeah." Hank sighed and rubbed his tired eyes before looking back at him. "It happens. It's not about whether you froze. It's about what you do next." The kid swallowed hard and nodded, standing a little taller. "I won't freeze next time." Hank smirked. "Good. But let's hope there ain't a next time." With the convoy back on the road, the tension started to fade, but Hank couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time someone would try something like this. The world wasn't what it used to be. Once, long ago, men like Hank had been respected. Truckers were kings of the road, veterans were honored, and no one dared lay a hand on a rig without thinking twice. But now, too many people thought they could take what they wanted, no matter the cost. Hank wasn't one to dwell on the past, but he sure as hell wasn't going to let punks like these change the future. As he drove down the open highway, the sun beginning its slow descent into the horizon, Hank glanced at the old dog tags swinging from his rearview mirror. A reminder of who he was, a reminder of the men he had fought alongside. Some had made it home, some hadn't. And that was why he did this. That was why this convoy mattered. He reached for the CB radio, his voice steady as he spoke. "Convoy's rolling," he said, the response crackling back from the other drivers. They were still on the road, still moving forward, because no matter what, men like Hank didn't back down. And today had been just another reminder. There were still some roads you shouldn't try to block.